They thought she was just another civilian contractor who barely knew the difference between a wrench and a socket. Little did they know, they were dismissing America's most lethal armored warfare specialist. Every Monday morning at Fort Richardson, Alaska, the same unremarkable woman appeared at the 3rd Armored Brigade's heavy equipment maintenance bay. The soldiers called her Grease Monkey behind her back, watching as she methodically cleaned tank treads, organized spare parts, and performed basic maintenance tasks that kept their M1A2 Abrams tanks operational. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena Martinez looked exactly like what you'd expect from a civilian maintenance contractor. Faded blue coveralls with oil stains that told stories of countless hours spent crawling under massive war machines. Steel-toed boots that had seen better days, always caked with mud from the Alaskan training grounds. Her dark hair was perpetually pulled back in a practical ponytail, and safety glasses hung around her neck like a badge of her unglamorous profession. She was compact, maybe 5'4", and moved with the careful deliberation of someone who understood that a moment's carelessness around 70-ton vehicles could result in serious injury or death. Her hands were small but calloused, stained with hydraulic fluid and engine grease that no amount of scrubbing could completely remove. The tank crews barely acknowledged her presence most mornings. When they did notice Elena, it was usually to point out some minor maintenance issue they discovered or to request that she prioritize certain vehicles for their upcoming training exercises. "Hey, Martinez," Sergeant First Class Brian Kowalski would call out, gesturing toward his Abrams with the casual authority of someone who'd been commanding tank crews for 8 years. "The left side drive sprocket's making noise again. Think you can take a look before we head out to the range?" Elena would simply nod politely and make notes on her worn clipboard, adding Kowalski's tank to her growing list of maintenance priorities. She never argued about workload or complained about the demanding schedule that kept her busy from dawn until well after the crews had returned from their training missions. "Does she even know what she's looking at under those hoods?" Specialist Derek Thompson whispered to his loader, loud enough for Elena to hear as she worked nearby. "I've seen auto mechanics with more technical knowledge than our civilian contractor here." The comment drew snickers from Thompson's crew, who found humor in questioning the competence of someone they viewed as barely qualified to change oil filters, let alone understand the complex mechanical systems that kept their tanks operational in harsh Arctic conditions. Elena never responded to their casual mockery. She would continue her systematic inspection routines, checking track tension, hydraulic fluid levels, and engine diagnostics with methodical precision that spoke of someone who took pride in thorough work, regardless of how others perceived her capabilities. The maintenance bay at Fort Richardson was a sprawling complex designed to service the brigade's fleet of main battle tanks, armored personnel carriers, and support vehicles. The facility operated around the clock, supporting training operations that prepared crews for deployments to some of the world's most challenging environments. Elena's official role was listed as Heavy Equipment Maintenance Specialist, a civilian contractor position that involved basic mechanical services and preventative maintenance tasks that freed up military personnel for more specialized training activities. Her contract had been processed through standard procurement channels 8 months earlier, with paperwork that looked completely routine to anyone who reviewed it. Staff Sergeant Michelle Chen, the brigade's maintenance chief, had approved Elena's hiring without much consideration beyond the standard background check requirements. The paperwork indicated a civilian contractor with experience in heavy machinery maintenance, willing to work in remote conditions for competitive civilian pay rates. Elena's references had been checked out through standard verification procedures. Her background investigation had returned clean results, showing no criminal history or security concerns that would disqualify her from working around military equipment. She'd passed the basic security screening required for civilian contractors who needed access to military installations. What the screening process hadn't revealed were the subtle inconsistencies in her behavior that might have raised questions for someone paying closer attention to details beyond basic qualifications and security clearances. Elena's maintenance routine wasn't random or haphazard like most civilian contractors who worked around military equipment. She moved through the facility following specific patterns that provided visual oversight of all vehicle positions, crew activities, and training preparations. Her positioning always gave her clear sight lines to the most critical maintenance areas and operational planning sessions. Her civilian coveralls weren't standard issue industrial wear, but were constructed from flame-resistant materials designed for extreme conditions. The fabric specifications were identical to those used in advanced military combat uniforms, offering protection against hydraulic fires and chemical exposure that went beyond typical contractor safety requirements. Elena's toolkit contained equipment that was unusually sophisticated for basic maintenance work. Her diagnostic computers were military-grade systems capable of interfacing with classified tank electronics, and her precision measurement tools were calibrated to standards that exceeded civilian maintenance requirements. Most significantly, Elena always seemed to position herself in exactly the right location at exactly the right time. When crews were conducting pre-mission briefings that involved sensitive tactical information, she'd find logical reasons to perform maintenance activities nearby. When classified equipment was being tested or calibrated, Elena would be working in adjacent areas where she could observe procedures while maintaining plausible cover for her presence. The tank crews saw exactly what they expected to see: a competent but unremarkable civilian contractor who kept their vehicles running smoothly and stayed out of their way during important military operations. They had no conception that they were being systematically observed and evaluated by someone whose understanding of armored warfare capabilities far exceeded their own. Elena's access to the maintenance bay provided perfect cover for comprehensive surveillance of the brigade's operational capabilities, training procedures, and equipment readiness levels. Her position allowed her to monitor crew performance, assess vehicle condition, and gather intelligence about deployment preparations without attracting attention from security personnel who were focused on more obvious threats. The first hint that Elena possessed knowledge extending beyond basic maintenance came during a routine diagnostic procedure in late September. The brigade's newest Abrams tank had developed a complex hydraulic problem that was affecting its turret rotation system, creating performance issues that threatened to remove the vehicle from upcoming training exercises. Sergeant Chen was growing frustrated as she watched her mechanics struggle with diagnostic procedures that weren't yielding clear answers about the hydraulic malfunction. The problem seemed intermittent, appearing during some operations but not others, making it difficult to isolate the root cause through standard troubleshooting methods. "Rodriguez, check the pressure relief valve settings again," Chen ordered, her voice carrying the sharp edge of professional irritation. "Patterson, verify the hydraulic filter housing for contamination. This system should be running smoothly and we're missing something obvious." The mechanics were following proper diagnostic procedures, but the intermittent nature of the hydraulic problem made it resistant to standard troubleshooting approaches. The tank's computer systems weren't generating error codes that pointed to specific component failures, and visual inspection hadn't revealed obvious mechanical problems. Elena was performing routine maintenance on a nearby vehicle when she overheard the discussion about the hydraulic system malfunction. She glanced toward the problem tank where military mechanics were working through increasingly complex diagnostic procedures, and for just a moment her composed expression flickered with something that looked like professional recognition. Her hands paused in their cleaning routine, and she took a half-step toward the maintenance area before catching herself and forcing her attention back to her assigned tasks. Elena knew exactly what was causing the hydraulic system problems and could have resolved the issue in 20 minutes. But revealing that knowledge would raise questions about her technical background that she wasn't prepared to answer. The hydraulic problem was caused by a known defect in the pressure regulation system that affected tanks manufactured during a specific production run. The malfunction occurred only when the system reached certain temperature and pressure combinations, making it appear intermittent when it was actually following predictable patterns that could be diagnosed through specialized procedures. Elena forced herself to turn away from the troubleshooting activities and continue with her routine maintenance duties, her movements showing slightly more tension than usual as she listened to the continued struggles of mechanics who were working harder than necessary to solve a problem that had standard solutions. That's when Specialist Thompson decided to entertain his crew with some humor at Elena's expense, unaware that his casual mockery was about to test the patience of someone whose tolerance for disrespect had very specific limits. "Hey, Grease Monkey," Thompson called out in a voice deliberately loud enough to carry across the maintenance bay. "You spend all day around these tanks. Maybe you could give these mechanics some tips on how to fix hydraulic systems that actually work." The laughter that erupted from Thompson's crew was designed to be humiliating, the kind of mockery that military personnel sometimes directed at civilian contractors they perceived as trying too hard to fit into an environment where they didn't belong. Elena's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but she maintained her professional composure. She simply continued working while the tank crews enjoyed their joke at her expense, the sound of their amusement echoing through the maintenance bay like a reminder of how little they valued her presence among them. But Staff Sergeant Chen had been watching the interaction, and something about Elena's reaction caught her attention in a way that made her uncomfortable. It wasn't the response she'd expected from a civilian contractor being mocked by soldiers. There had been something in Elena's posture when she'd moved toward the hydraulic problem area before stopping herself. Chen had been managing maintenance operations for 12 years, and she'd developed instincts for recognizing when people possessed capabilities that weren't immediately obvious. As she watched Elena continue her methodical work routine while maintaining professional dignity despite the mockery, something was telling her that their civilian contractor might know more about tank systems than anyone had realized. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The second week of October brought bitter Alaskan winds and an escalation in the treatment Elena had grown accustomed to enduring. Word of her embarrassing moment with Thompson's crew had spread throughout the brigade, creating a ripple effect of casual disrespect that transformed her daily work environment into something more hostile than before. Private First Class Marcus Williams had joined Thompson's campaign of mockery with enthusiasm that bordered on cruelty. During morning formation, he'd taken to making loud comments whenever Elena arrived for her shift, drawing attention from other soldiers who might otherwise have ignored the civilian contractor entirely. "Look alive, boys," Williams would announce with theatrical exaggeration. "The tank whisperer is here to teach us about proper maintenance procedures." His squad would respond with exaggerated salutes toward Elena, their fake respect accompanied by barely suppressed laughter that made it clear they viewed her as entertainment rather than a professional colleague. The mockery had evolved beyond casual jokes into a systematic campaign designed to undermine Elena's credibility and professional standing within the maintenance facility. Thompson had begun creating elaborate scenarios where he would publicly question Elena's competence in front of other crews, always framing his comments as helpful suggestions while actually highlighting her perceived inadequacies. "Martinez," Thompson called out, during a particularly busy morning when multiple crews were preparing for training exercises. "I've been thinking about your maintenance procedures, and I wonder if you might benefit from some basic training on tank systems. Maybe we could arrange for you to shadow one of our mechanics so you can learn proper diagnostic techniques." The suggestion was delivered with mock sincerity that fooled no one. Thompson's tone made it abundantly clear that he was offering charity to someone he viewed as fundamentally unqualified for her position. His crew gathered around to witness Elena's response, anticipating another moment of public humiliation they could add to their growing collection of stories about the incompetent civilian contractor. Elena absorbed Thompson's condescending offer with the same professional dignity she brought to all aspects of her work. She nodded politely and thanked him for his concern about her professional development, refusing to take the bait that would have escalated the confrontation into something more serious. "I appreciate your willingness to help improve maintenance procedures," Elena replied calmly. "If you have specific concerns about my work quality, I'm happy to address them through appropriate channels." Her response demonstrated remarkable self-control, but those watching closely might have noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders that suggested Thompson's persistent harassment was testing her patience. Staff Sergeant Chen had been observing these interactions with growing discomfort about the direction things were taking. While military personnel were entitled to maintain high standards for civilian contractors, the treatment Elena was receiving seemed to cross the line from professional oversight into personal harassment. "Thompson, Williams," Chen interjected with the authoritative tone that senior non-commissioned officers used when they wanted to redirect behavior before it became a disciplinary issue. "Don't you have pre-mission inspections to complete instead of conducting training seminars for civilian contractors?" Chen's intervention temporarily scattered Thompson's audience, but it didn't address the underlying problem that had been building over the past weeks. The mockery had taken on a life of its own, spreading throughout the brigade as soldiers repeated stories about Elena's supposed incompetence and shared jokes about civilian contractors who thought they understood military equipment. Sergeant First Class Janet Morrison had been quietly watching the escalating harassment with professional concern that extended beyond simple workplace courtesy. Morrison had 15 years of experience managing civilian contractors, and she'd learned to recognize when workplace dynamics were becoming problematic for operational effectiveness. Morrison approached Elena during a quiet moment when the maintenance bay was less crowded, hoping to assess whether the ongoing harassment was affecting Elena's ability to perform her assigned duties effectively. "Martinez," Morrison said quietly, positioning herself where their conversation couldn't be easily overheard by other personnel. "How are you finding the work environment here? I know some of the younger soldiers can be pretty rough around civilian contractors who are new to military facilities." Elena paused in her hydraulic system inspection and looked up at Morrison with an expression that was carefully neutral. For just a moment, Morrison caught something in Elena's eyes that suggested the harassment was affecting her more than she was willing to admit publicly. "The work itself is satisfying," Elena replied diplomatically. "The soldiers are dedicated to their missions, and I understand that maintaining high standards is important for operational readiness." It was a professional response that acknowledged Morrison's concern while avoiding direct complaints about specific individuals or incidents. Morrison recognized Elena's careful evasiveness, but she also respected the civilian contractor's desire to handle workplace conflicts without creating additional problems for herself. Military facilities could be challenging environments for civilian personnel, and Elena's approach showed understanding of the delicate balance required to maintain working relationships while preserving professional dignity. "Well, if you ever need to discuss anything through official channels, my door is always open," Morrison offered. "Civilian contractors are important members of our team, and everyone deserves to work in an environment where they can focus on their responsibilities without unnecessary distractions." Elena thanked Morrison for her professional courtesy, but both women understood that the harassment campaign wasn't something that could be easily resolved through administrative intervention. Thompson and his followers were careful to keep their mockery within bounds that avoided direct insubordination, while still creating a hostile environment for their target. The situation escalated further when Corporal David Kim joined the harassment campaign with tactics that were more sophisticated than Thompson's crude jokes. Kim had developed a pattern of assigning Elena unnecessarily complex maintenance tasks while providing inadequate information about procedures, creating situations where her work would appear deficient to casual observers. "Martinez, I need you to recalibrate the fire control system on Tank Alpha 7. The computer interface has been acting up, and we need it fixed before tomorrow's live fire exercise." His request sounded reasonable to anyone listening, but Kim knew that fire control system calibration required specialized knowledge and security clearances that civilian contractors weren't supposed to possess. Elena examined Kim's request with the same systematic attention she brought to all maintenance assignments, but she quickly recognized that he was testing her knowledge of systems that exceeded her official authorization levels. The fire control calibration he was requesting involved classified procedures that would require her to demonstrate capabilities far beyond basic maintenance work. "Corporal Kim," Elena replied carefully, "fire control system calibration requires specialized technical certifications and security clearances that aren't included in my contract specifications. I'd recommend coordinating that work through military technical personnel who have appropriate authorization levels." Kim's response revealed his disappointment that Elena hadn't fallen into the trap he'd prepared for her. He'd been hoping she would either attempt work beyond her qualifications, creating grounds for professional criticism, or reveal knowledge that would raise questions about her background and training. "Right," Kim said with obvious frustration. "I forgot that civilian contractors have limited technical capabilities. I guess we'll have to handle the complex work ourselves while you stick to cleaning and basic maintenance tasks." Alina absorbed Kim's dismissive comment without visible reaction, but Morrison, who had been observing the interaction, found herself studying the civilian contractor with new interest. Elena's response to Kim's test had been professionally perfect, demonstrating clear understanding of authorization boundaries while avoiding technical work that could create security concerns. The harassment campaign reached new levels of creativity when Private Williams developed a series of training scenarios designed to publicly demonstrate Elena's supposed ignorance about tank operations. Williams would create elaborate situations where Elena would be asked technical questions in front of other crews, always framing his inquiries as educational opportunities while actually setting her up for public humiliation. "Hey, Martinez," Williams called out during a morning when several crews were gathered for mission briefings. "I've been curious about your thoughts on optimal track tension settings for different terrain conditions. As someone who works with these systems daily, you must have insights about how environmental factors affect mechanical performance." Williams's question was technically sophisticated, designed to expose Elena's supposed lack of knowledge about advanced tank operations while appearing to seek her professional input. His squad gathered around to witness another moment where their civilian contractor would reveal her fundamental incompetence with military equipment. Elena considered Williams' question for a moment, recognizing it as another attempt to publicly embarrass her while creating entertainment for his audience. She could have provided a comprehensive technical analysis of track tension variables, environmental considerations, and performance optimization strategies that would have stunned everyone present. Instead, she chose to deflect the question in a way that acknowledged Williams' inquiry while avoiding the trap he'd prepared for her. "Private Williams, track tension specifications are determined by technical manuals and operational requirements. I focus on maintenance procedures that support those specifications rather than making independent assessments about tactical applications." Elena's response was diplomatically perfect, demonstrating respect for military expertise while avoiding technical discussions that might reveal knowledge beyond her supposed qualifications. But Williams pressed forward with his harassment campaign, unwilling to accept that his target had successfully avoided his latest attempt at public humiliation. "Come on, Martinez," Williams called out with mock encouragement. "You're around these tanks more than most of us. Surely you have opinions about how they should be configured for optimal performance. We're all just trying to learn from your extensive experience with heavy equipment maintenance." The sarcasm in Williams's voice was unmistakable, and his emphasis on extensive experience was clearly intended to highlight what he viewed as Elena's inflated sense of her own capabilities. His crew was enjoying the performance, anticipating that continued pressure would eventually force Elena into admitting her technical limitations. Elena recognized that Williams was escalating his harassment beyond previous levels, testing her patience and professional restraint in ways that were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. She could feel the attention of other personnel focusing on their interaction, and she understood that her response would influence how future confrontations developed. "Private Williams," Elena said with quiet firmness that contained subtle warnings about crossing professional boundaries. "I appreciate your interest in maintenance procedures, but I think our time would be better spent focusing on assigned responsibilities rather than theoretical discussions about equipment optimization." Her response carried implications that Williams was prioritizing entertainment over professional duties, a criticism that could have disciplinary consequences if brought to the attention of senior personnel. Williams recognized the warning in Elena's tone and decided to retreat rather than risk escalating the confrontation into something that might attract unwanted attention from his supervisors. As the harassment campaign continued to evolve, none of the participants realized they were pushing someone whose patience had very specific limits and whose response to continued provocation would be far more dramatic than anything they could imagine. Elena Martinez was about to reach a decision point that would change everything about her relationship with the soldiers who had been systematically undermining her professional dignity. The third week of November brought unseasonably heavy snow and an emergency that would fundamentally alter everyone's perception of their civilian contractor. Fort Richardson's training schedule had been disrupted by a mechanical crisis that threatened to derail the brigade's most important readiness assessment of the year. The Gunnery Table 8 qualification was scheduled to begin at dawn, a comprehensive evaluation that would determine which tank crews advanced to deployment readiness status. For the crews involved, this wasn't just another training exercise. It was their gateway to joining elite armored units scheduled for overseas assignments where their skills would be tested under actual combat conditions. Master Sergeant Nicole Foster discovered the crisis during her pre-qualification equipment inspection. The brigade's primary training tank, a specially modified M1A2 equipped with advanced targeting systems worth over $4 million, had suffered a complete failure of its digital fire control computer during overnight maintenance operations. "The entire ballistic calculation system is down," Foster announced to the assembled qualification candidates, her voice carrying the weight of professional disappointment mixed with frustration at circumstances beyond anyone's control. The 12 tank crews awaiting their qualifications exchanged worried glances as they realized months of intensive preparation might be wasted because of electronic failure. In the armored community, timing was absolutely critical, and delays in qualification could mean missing deployment opportunities or being reassigned to conventional units where their specialized training would be underutilized. Sergeant First Class Angela Hayes, one of the qualification candidates whose performance scores had been exceptional throughout the preparation period, stepped forward with obvious concern about the implications of the equipment failure. "Master Sergeant, what are our alternatives? Is there backup equipment available that can meet the qualification requirements?" Hayes asked, voicing the concern that all the crews were feeling about their professional advancement opportunities. Foster shook her head grimly. The backup fire control system was deployed with a training unit at Fort Carson, Colorado. Getting it transported to Alaska would require at least 72 hours, assuming no complications with logistics coordination or weather delays that could extend the timeline even further. The delay would be catastrophic for the qualification schedule. These crews had coordinated leave time, arranged family obligations, and aligned their training cycles around this specific evaluation window. A 3-day postponement would create cascading problems throughout multiple commands and potentially force some candidates to wait additional months before their next qualification opportunity. Tank Commander Staff Sergeant Robert Chen, whose crew had posted the highest accuracy scores during preliminary training, voiced what everyone was thinking about the qualification delay. "Master Sergeant, there has to be something we can do to resolve this problem without a complete postponement. Our crews have been preparing for this qualification for 6 months." Foster had exhausted all obvious solutions. The facility's other tanks either lacked the advanced targeting systems required for Table 8 standards or were committed to other training activities that couldn't be interrupted without affecting the entire base's operational schedule. The digital fire control computer wasn't something that could be repaired quickly without specialized technical support that wasn't available at Fort Richardson. Elena Martinez had been performing routine maintenance on hydraulic systems near the equipment bay when she overheard the discussion about the fire control malfunction. She'd been quietly organizing spare parts and cleaning fluid reservoirs, staying out of the way while military personnel dealt with their qualification crisis. "Excuse me, Master Sergeant," Elena said quietly, stepping forward from her position near the parts storage area. "I might be able to help with the fire control system malfunction." The silence that followed Elena's offer was immediate and uncomfortable. 12 of the Army's most promising tank crews, along with their senior qualification instructor, all turned to stare at the civilian contractor who apparently believed she could resolve a technical problem that had stumped trained military electronics specialists. Foster's initial reaction was professional courtesy mixed with skepticism about civilian technical capabilities. "Martinez, I appreciate your willingness to help, but this is an extremely sophisticated military computer system that requires specialized knowledge to diagnose and repair properly." The error codes you're seeing are probably related to corrupted targeting algorithms in the ballistic calculation matrix, Elena continued, her voice maintaining its quiet tone but carrying a technical authority that hadn't been present in her previous interactions with military personnel. The fire control computer relies on real-time environmental data integration, and if the targeting algorithms become corrupted, the entire system defaults to safety mode and displays generic diagnostic messages. The technical specificity of Elena's diagnosis was startling, particularly coming from someone whose official role involved basic maintenance tasks and equipment cleaning. Foster found herself actually considering Elena's words, despite every instinct telling her that civilian contractors shouldn't be offering technical advice about classified military systems. Before Foster could respond to Elena's technical assessment, Staff Sergeant Chen approached from the qualification staging area, having overheard the conversation about potential solutions to the fire control malfunction. "Ma'am, with all due respect," Chen interjected, his tone carrying barely concealed frustration about civilian involvement in military equipment repairs, "are we seriously considering allowing a maintenance contractor to work on our primary qualification tank? This system contains classified targeting algorithms and advanced military electronics." Elena took a step back from the tank, her hands moving into a neutral position that somehow managed to be both deferential and subtly resistant. The movement was precise and controlled, suggesting someone accustomed to military bearing even while maintaining civilian contractor status. "I was only attempting to offer assistance," Elena said quietly, but there was something in her tone that indicated Chen's dismissive attitude was testing her patience in ways that previous mockery hadn't quite achieved. "Well, your assistance isn't needed or appropriate," Chen replied curtly, his voice carrying the kind of finality that tank commanders used when they wanted to end discussions immediately. The assembled qualification candidates watched this exchange with growing discomfort. Chen's tone was harsh, even by military standards, and there seemed to be something unnecessarily personal about the way he was dismissing Elena, who had spent months quietly supporting their training activities without causing problems or complaints. But Elena didn't immediately retreat to her maintenance duties as Chen had clearly expected. Instead, she remained where she was, studying the disabled fire control system with an intensity that suggested she was seeing details that others were missing. Her gaze moved systematically across the tank's electronic components, pausing at specific points in ways that she was conducting a mental diagnostic process far more sophisticated than anything a civilian contractor should possess. "The targeting algorithm corruption I mentioned," Elena said, her voice still quiet but carrying a new edge of professional authority that made several crews step closer to hear her clearly. "This particular model of fire control computer has a known defect in the data storage matrix that causes this exact problem after approximately 15,000 targeting calculations." Foster felt a chill of recognition. She remembered reading something about data storage issues in advanced fire control systems, but the technical details hadn't stuck in her memory clearly enough for her to make the connection. Elena was describing knowledge of manufacturer technical specifications and operational limitations that were far more detailed than any civilian should possess. "How could you possibly know about manufacturer defects in classified military systems?" Chen demanded, his voice rising with incredulity and growing anger. "That information is distributed through restricted channels to qualified military electronics personnel only." Elena met Chen's challenging stare with steady calm, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she was carefully calculating her response. For just a moment, her civilian contractor persona seemed to flicker, revealing something harder and more professional underneath. "I make it a point to stay informed about the equipment I work around," Elena replied simply, but her tone carried implications that extended far beyond casual interest in tank maintenance procedures. Tank Commander Hayes, who had been watching Elena's diagnostic process with growing curiosity, found herself studying the civilian contractor with new appreciation for her technical knowledge. "Ma'am, if you really think you can repair the fire control system, maybe we should consider letting you try," We've got nothing to lose at this point, and everything to gain if you can get us back on schedule." Hayes's comment drew sharp looks from Chen, who clearly disapproved of tank crews supporting civilian involvement in critical equipment repairs. But Hayes's frustration with the qualification delay was overriding her usual deference to senior personnel authority, and several other crews were nodding in agreement with her suggestion. "Absolutely not," Chen stated firmly. "We're not going to risk damaging irreplaceable military equipment based on unsubstantiated claims of technical expertise from someone whose qualifications are completely unknown to us." Elena's response came with confidence that surprised everyone present. "Staff Sergeant Chen, if I attempt to repair the fire control system and cause additional damage, I'm willing to accept full financial responsibility for equipment replacement costs. I'll sign documentation accepting that liability if it addresses your concerns about risk to military property." The offer was unexpected and demonstrated a level of confidence in her technical abilities that stunned the qualification candidates. Most people wouldn't accept financial responsibility for equipment worth more than most people earned in several years unless they were absolutely certain of their capabilities to work with it safely. Foster found herself torn between military protocol and practical necessity. The qualification schedule was critical for the crew's career advancement. The equipment delay would create significant problems throughout the training pipeline. And Elena's technical diagnosis had sounded remarkably knowledgeable despite her civilian status. "Let me see the diagnostic display," Elena said, stepping closer to the tank's electronic systems before anyone could object to her approach. Her movement toward the equipment was smooth and purposeful, suggesting familiarity with similar systems that extended well beyond casual observation during maintenance activities. As Elena examined the fire control computer's display screen, her demeanor underwent a subtle but noticeable transformation. Her movements became more systematic and professional. Her examination of the system followed logical diagnostic patterns, and her handling of the electronic components showed confidence that typically came from extensive experience with identical equipment. "The problem is definitely in the targeting algorithm storage matrix," Elena announced after several minutes of systematic examination. "The ballistic calculation protocols are showing data corruption in sectors 7 through 12, which means the algorithm database has exceeded its error correction thresholds." Foster watched Elena's diagnostic process with growing amazement. The technical precision of her analysis was exceeding anything she would have expected from civilian maintenance personnel. Elena was identifying specific system failures that would take most military electronics specialists hours to diagnose properly. "Outstanding diagnostic work," Foster commented, genuine professional admiration evident in her voice. "How did you learn to work with advanced military fire control systems at this level of technical detail?" Elena's response was carefully worded, but there was something in her tone that suggested Foster's professional recognition meant more to her than casual praise about her maintenance capabilities. "Electronic diagnostic procedures follow logical patterns once you understand the system architecture and operational requirements." But Foster knew that military fire control computers weren't typical electronic equipment, and the diagnostic procedures Elena had used were specific to weapon system applications that required specialized training to understand properly. Her systematic approach to the repair process suggested experience with similar systems that extended well beyond civilian electronics work. What happened next would force everyone present to completely reevaluate their assumptions about Elena Martinez and her true technical capabilities. Elena's successful repair of the fire control system had created ripple effects throughout Fort Richardson that extended far beyond the qualification schedule. Word of the civilian contractor's remarkable technical achievement spread through the armored brigade like wildfire, generating conversations among personnel who were struggling to reconcile their assumptions about civilian capabilities with the undeniable evidence of Elena's sophisticated electronics expertise. Staff Sergeant Chen had been particularly vocal about his suspicions regarding Elena's background, suggesting to anyone who would listen that there had to be some form of deception or concealed military experience involved in her technical performance. Nobody develops that level of expertise with classified fire control systems through civilian training. Chen had been telling his crew members during their post-qualification equipment checks. Either she's lying about her background, or there's something seriously irregular about how she acquired that knowledge. His comments had been growing more pointed and personal over the past week, reflecting a combination of wounded professional pride and genuine suspicion about Elena's true qualifications. Chen had completed advanced electronics schools and considered himself an expert on military systems, making Elena's superior technical performance particularly challenging to his sense of professional competence. "I'm telling you guys, something doesn't add up about Martinez," Chen continued, using her last name with increased emphasis as his resentment grew. "Civilian contractors don't just appear and start repairing systems that stump our best military technicians. There's gotta be some kind of background she's concealing from us." Tank Commander Hayes, who had witnessed Elena's diagnostic work firsthand, found herself increasingly uncomfortable with Chen's conspiracy theories about their civilian contractor. "Robert, I was there when she fixed the fire control system. There wasn't any deception involved. She just demonstrated better technical knowledge than most of us expected." "That's exactly my point," Chen replied, his voice taking on the aggressive tone he used when he felt his authority was being challenged. "How does a civilian maintenance contractor develop technical knowledge that exceeds military-trained specialists? It doesn't make sense unless she's hiding something significant about her professional background." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Master Sergeant Foster, who had been conducting her own informal investigation into Elena's background since the remarkable fire control demonstration. Foster had been asking discreet questions around base about Elena's application process, her references, and her stated reasons for accepting a civilian contractor position in remote Alaska. "Chen, Hayes, prepare for the advanced maneuvering exercise," Foster ordered, but her tone suggested she had something else on her mind beyond routine training schedules. "We're going to be working with some of the new digital targeting systems, so make sure your crews are familiar with the latest interface protocols." As the tank crews began preparing their equipment, Foster continued with what seemed like casual conversation but carried undertones of something more significant. "You know, I've been thinking about our civilian contractor and her impressive technical performance last week. It's interesting how someone can demonstrate such advanced capabilities without any documented military electronics training." Her comments were clearly intended to reinforce the growing suspicions about Elena's background, and they had the desired effect on Chen, who nodded vigorously in agreement with Foster's assessment. "That's exactly what I've been saying, Master Sergeant. Something about her technical knowledge doesn't match her supposed civilian background. People don't develop that level of expertise with classified systems through contractor work." Foster had been making discreet inquiries through official channels about Elena's application materials and background investigation results. Elena's personnel file listed her as unemployed at the time of application, with previous work experience in heavy equipment maintenance for civilian construction companies. But people with construction backgrounds don't typically develop expertise with advanced military electronics. "I've been reviewing her application documentation," Foster continued, lowering her voice in a way that suggested she was sharing privileged information. "Elena Martinez's work history includes several gaps that aren't fully explained in her background materials. There are periods where her employment status is unclear, and her references are somewhat vague about the specific nature of her technical training." Hayes shifted uncomfortably as she listened to Foster's implications about Elena's honesty and background. While she agreed that Elena's technical performance had been remarkably sophisticated, she wasn't entirely comfortable with the direction these discussions were taking. "Maybe she just had really comprehensive training from her previous employers," Hayes suggested, trying to inject some balance into the conversation. "Some civilian companies provide extensive technical education for their maintenance personnel, especially for specialized equipment operations." Chen's response was immediate and dismissive. Angela, nobody gets that good with military fire control systems without direct military training and security clearances. We're talking about classified electronics that require years of specialized education to understand properly. Foster nodded approvingly at Chen's technical assessment. Exactly, which raises questions about who Elena Martinez really is and why someone with her apparent capabilities is working as a basic maintenance contractor instead of pursuing more advanced technical positions. The implications of Foster's comments were clear to everyone present. She suspected Elena of deliberately concealing her true background and qualifications for reasons that might not be entirely legitimate. The suggestion that Elena might be engaged in some form of deception was creating an atmosphere of suspicion that would affect her interactions with personnel throughout the facility. As the morning training progressed, Elena arrived for her regular maintenance duties, unaware that her fire control repair had generated an investigation campaign that was being conducted largely behind her back. She began her usual routine of organizing equipment and preparing maintenance supplies, but she couldn't help noticing that the atmosphere around the facility felt different somehow. Personnel who had previously ignored her presence were now watching her with obvious curiosity mixed with something that looked like suspicion. Conversation seemed to stop when she walked by, and she caught fragments of discussions that suggested her technical demonstration had become a topic of considerable interest and speculation among the maintenance staff. "Good morning, Martinez," Master Sergeant Foster called out as she approached the maintenance area where Elena was organizing hydraulic system components. Foster's tone was professionally friendly, but there was something in her demeanor that suggested she had specific reasons for initiating this conversation beyond casual courtesy. "Good morning, Martinez," Elena replied, looking up from the equipment diagnostics she'd been reviewing with her usual systematic attention to detail. "Is there anything specific you need me to focus on during today's maintenance activities?" Foster studied Elena's face carefully as she responded, looking for any signs of discomfort or evasiveness that might support the growing suspicions about Elena's background and qualifications. "Actually, I wanted to follow up on last week's fire control repair work," Foster said. "The results were so impressive that several people have been asking questions about your electronics background and training experience." Elena's expression remained neutral, but Foster caught a slight tightening around her eyes that suggested questions about her background were making her uncomfortable in ways that went beyond normal privacy concerns. "I'm glad the repair work resolved the qualification scheduling problems," Elena replied carefully. "If there are other electronics issues where you think my assistance might be helpful, I'm available to support the mission requirements." It was a diplomatic response that acknowledged Foster's comment while attempting to redirect the conversation away from personal background questions. Foster recognized the deflection technique and found herself even more curious about what Elena might be trying to avoid discussing. "The thing is, Martinez," Foster continued, "your technical performance exceeded anything we would normally expect from civilian maintenance contractors. It's raised questions about whether we're making optimal use of your capabilities here at the facility." Elena was quiet for a moment, seeming to carefully consider her response before speaking. "Master Sergeant, I'm satisfied with my current responsibilities and appreciate the opportunity to support the brigade's training mission. Equipment maintenance is important work that contributes to operational readiness." But Foster noticed that Elena's hands had stopped their systematic organization of diagnostic equipment during this conversation, and her posture had become slightly more rigid in ways that suggested she was exercising considerable self-control about something. Before Foster could pursue the conversation further, Staff Sergeant Chen approached with Tank Commander Hayes in tow, both of them carrying the kind of purposeful demeanor that suggested they had specific objectives for this interaction. "Martinez," Chen called out, using Elena's last name in a way that sounded more like an interrogation than casual conversation. "We need to discuss some concerns that have come up about your technical qualifications and background documentation." The directness of Chen's statement immediately changed the atmosphere of the conversation, transforming what had been a somewhat casual discussion into something that felt more like an official inquiry. Elena turned to face Chen with an expression that remained calm and professional, but Foster could see tension building in her posture that suggested she was preparing for some form of confrontation. "I'm not aware of any problems with my application materials or work performance," Elena replied evenly. "All the information I provided was accurate and complete according to the requirements that were explained during the application process." Chen pulled out a folder containing what appeared to be Elena's personnel documentation and background investigation results. "According to your file, your previous work experience consists entirely of civilian construction and heavy equipment maintenance. You list no military experience, no formal electronics training, and no background that would explain the advanced technical capabilities you demonstrated last week." Hayes stepped forward with an expression that mixed professional curiosity with growing suspicion about Elena's true qualifications. "The kind of electronics work you performed on our fire control system requires years of specialized training and security clearances that most civilians never receive. How do you explain that level of technical expertise?" Elena listened to their accusations without changing expression, but Foster noticed that her breathing had become more controlled and her stance had shifted almost imperceptibly into something that looked more balanced and ready for unexpected developments. "Staff Sergeant Chen, Tank Commander Hayes," Elena replied with careful politeness, "I understand that my technical performance may have exceeded your expectations, but that doesn't mean there are any inaccuracies in my personnel documentation. People can develop advanced skills through dedicated study and practical experience." Chen's response was immediate and pointed. "Elena, we're not trying to create problems for you, but when someone demonstrates capabilities that don't match their stated background, it raises legitimate questions about their honesty and motivations." The accusation of dishonesty clearly struck a nerve with Elena, whose carefully maintained composure showed the first real crack since the conversation had begun. Her jaw tightened slightly, and for just a moment her civilian contractor persona seemed to flicker, revealing glimpses of something harder and more professional underneath. "Are you questioning my integrity?" Elena asked, her voice still quiet but carrying a new edge of authority that made Chen take an involuntary step backward. "Because if you are, I think this conversation should continue through official channels with proper documentation rather than informal accusations in a maintenance area." The response surprised everyone present because it demonstrated knowledge of military administrative procedures and protocols that most civilian contractors wouldn't possess. Elena's reference to official channels and proper documentation suggested familiarity with military investigative processes that went beyond what would be expected from someone whose only connection to the military was contractor work. Foster found herself studying Elena with renewed interest as she watched the confrontation unfold. There was something about Elena's response to Chen's accusations that suggested she wasn't intimidated by military authority in the way that most civilians would be when questioned by senior personnel. "Nobody's questioning your integrity," Chen replied, though his tone suggested that was exactly what he was doing. "We're just trying to understand how someone develops your level of technical capability without the kind of background that would explain it." Elena was quiet for a long moment, and those watching closely might have noticed that she was carefully evaluating her options and considering how much truth to reveal. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a mixture of patience and warning that suggested her tolerance for accusations and suspicion was approaching its limits. "Staff Sergeant Chen, I've been working here for 8 months without any problems or complaints about my performance or conduct. I've been professional, reliable, and effective in supporting the training mission. If you have specific concerns about my qualifications, I suggest you address them through proper administrative channels, rather than making accusations based on assumptions about civilian capabilities." The response was perfectly reasonable and professionally delivered, but it also carried subtle implications that Elena Martinez might not be as vulnerable to military pressure as Chen had assumed. There was something in Elena's tone that suggested she was prepared to escalate this confrontation to higher authority levels if necessary, and that she might have resources or support that Chen hadn't considered. As the conversation concluded with an uncomfortable stalemate, none of the military personnel involved realized they were pushing someone whose patience had very specific limits, and whose response to continued harassment would reveal capabilities that would fundamentally change their understanding of who they were really dealing with. The first Tuesday of December brought a blizzard that would test everyone's assumptions about crisis management and operational capabilities. Fort Richardson's most critical training exercise of the year, the Winter Warfare Readiness Assessment, was scheduled to commence at 0600 hours, but a catastrophic equipment failure threatened to derail the entire evaluation that would determine the brigade's deployment certification for Arctic combat operations. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Blackwood discovered the crisis during her pre-dawn inspection of the training complex. 3 of the brigade's most advanced M1A2 Abrams tanks had suffered simultaneous hydraulic system failures that rendered them completely immobile, creating a shortage of operational vehicles that could force cancellation of the assessment that had been planned for over 6 months. "We've got a complete hydraulic lockup on Alpha 3, Bravo 7, and Charlie 2, Blackwood announced to her senior staff, her voice carrying the weight of professional crisis management mixed with frustration at timing that couldn't have been worse. All 3 tanks are experiencing identical symptoms that suggest systematic component failure rather than random mechanical problems. The 12 tank crews scheduled for assessment gathered in the maintenance bay, their anxiety building as they realized that months of intensive cold weather training might be wasted because of mechanical failures that occurred at the worst possible moment. The Winter Warfare Assessment was conducted only once per year, and missing this evaluation window would delay their Arctic deployment certification by an entire training cycle. Master Sergeant Foster examined the diagnostic reports from all 3 disabled tanks, searching for patterns that might explain the simultaneous hydraulic failures. "The pressure readings are showing complete system collapse in the main hydraulic circuits," she reported. "All 3 tanks lost hydraulic power within a 2-hour window last night, which suggests a common cause rather than coincidental failures." Tank Commander Hayes stepped forward with obvious concern about the implications of the equipment crisis. "Ma'am, what are our backup options? Is there alternative equipment available that can meet the assessment requirements for winter operations?" Blackwood shook her head grimly. The brigade's reserve tanks were either undergoing scheduled maintenance or deployed with other units conducting training exercises at remote locations. Getting replacement vehicles would require coordination with multiple commands and transportation logistics that would take at least a week to arrange. "The assessment schedule is locked in with higher headquarters," Blackwood explained. "Postponement would affect deployment timelines throughout the entire division and potentially impact operational commitments that extend beyond our immediate training requirements." Staff Sergeant Chen, whose crew had been preparing for this assessment for 8 months, voiced what everyone was thinking about the equipment crisis. "Colonel, there has to be something we can do. Our crews are ready for deployment, and we can't let mechanical problems destroy our certification opportunity." The situation was becoming increasingly desperate as Blackwood and her staff exhausted conventional solutions to the hydraulic crisis. The simultaneous nature of the failures suggested a systematic problem that went beyond normal mechanical wear. But identifying the root cause would require diagnostic time that they didn't have available. Elena Martinez had been performing routine pre-exercise maintenance checks when she overheard the discussion about the hydraulic system failures. She'd been quietly preparing emergency repair kits and organizing backup components, staying out of the way while military personnel dealt with their certification crisis. "Excuse me, Lieutenant Colonel," Elena said quietly, stepping forward from her position near the emergency equipment storage area. "I might be able to help resolve the hydraulic system problems." The silence that followed Elena's offer was immediate and profound. The brigade's senior leadership, along with 12 of their most experienced tank crews, all turned to stare at the civilian contractor, who apparently believed she could resolve a mechanical crisis that had stumped their most qualified maintenance specialists. Blackwood's initial reaction was professional courtesy mixed with skepticism about civilian technical capabilities in a crisis situation. "Martinez, I appreciate your willingness to help, but we're dealing with simultaneous hydraulic failures across multiple vehicles. This appears to be a systematic problem that requires advanced diagnostic capabilities." "The hydraulic failures you're experiencing are probably caused by contaminated fluid in the central reservoir," Elena continued, her voice maintaining its quiet tone but carrying a technical authority that commanded attention. All three tanks share hydraulic fluid from the same supply source, and if that fluid became contaminated with particulate matter, it would cause identical system failures in multiple vehicles. The technical specificity of Elena's diagnosis was remarkable, particularly given that she'd had no direct access to the diagnostic data that the military specialists had been analyzing. Her assessment suggested an understanding of hydraulic system architecture that extended well beyond basic maintenance knowledge. Before Blackwood could respond to Elena's technical analysis, Staff Sergeant Chen stepped forward with obvious frustration about civilian involvement in their critical assessment crisis. "Ma'am, with all due respect," Chen interjected, his tone carrying barely concealed irritation about the suggestion that a contractor could resolve problems that had defeated military specialists. Elena took a measured step back, but her posture remained confident and ready. There was something in her demeanor that suggested Chen's dismissive attitude was testing her patience in ways that went beyond previous confrontations. "Staff Sergeant Chen," Elena said with careful control, "I understand your concerns about the assessment timeline, but hydraulic contamination follows predictable patterns that can be diagnosed through systematic testing procedures." Chen's response was immediate and pointed. "And how would you know about systematic hydraulic testing on military armored vehicles? That's specialized knowledge that requires years of formal training and hands-on experience with these specific systems." The question hung in the air as Elena considered her response. She could continue deflecting inquiries about her background while watching the assessment crisis unfold, or she could demonstrate capabilities that would resolve the immediate problem while raising serious questions about her true qualifications. Tank Commander Hayes, whose crew had been training intensively for this assessment, found herself studying Elena with growing desperation about their certification opportunity. "Ma'am, if you really think you can identify the hydraulic problem, maybe we should let you try. We're running out of time and alternatives." Hayes's comment drew sharp looks from Chen and Foster, who clearly disapproved of tank crews supporting civilian involvement in critical equipment repairs. But Hayes's frustration with the assessment delay was overriding her usual deference to senior authority, and several other crews were nodding in agreement with her suggestion. "Absolutely not," Chen stated firmly. "We're not going to risk damaging irreplaceable military equipment based on unsubstantiated theories from someone whose technical qualifications are completely unknown." Elena's response demonstrated confidence that surprised everyone present. "Staff Sergeant Chen, if I attempt to diagnose the hydraulic contamination and cause additional damage to the tanks, I'll accept full responsibility for repair costs and replacement equipment. I'm willing to document that liability in writing." The offer was extraordinary and showed a level of confidence in her technical abilities that stunned the assembled personnel. Most people wouldn't accept financial responsibility for equipment worth millions of dollars unless they were absolutely certain of their capabilities to work with it safely. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood found herself torn between military protocol and operational necessity. The assessment timeline was critical for the brigade's deployment schedule. Equipment delays would create significant problems throughout the division's training pipeline. And Elena's technical diagnosis had sounded remarkably knowledgeable despite her civilian status. "Martinez," Blackwood said carefully, "if you're confident you can identify the hydraulic contamination source without causing additional system damage, I'm authorizing you to proceed with diagnostic testing. These crews have been preparing for months, and I'm not going to let equipment problems destroy their certification opportunity if there's any reasonable chance of resolution." What happened next would force everyone present to completely reevaluate their assumptions about Elena Martinez and her true technical capabilities. The quiet civilian contractor was about to demonstrate expertise that would shatter her carefully maintained cover and reveal the truth about who she really was. Elena moved toward the first disabled tank with smooth, purposeful efficiency that immediately caught the attention of everyone watching. Instead of the tentative approach that most people would display when working with unfamiliar military equipment, she examined the hydraulic systems with systematic precision that suggested extensive prior experience with identical vehicles. Her diagnostic routine was flawless, following procedures that weren't documented in standard maintenance manuals but represented advanced troubleshooting techniques that required specialized training to master. Elena accessed hydraulic system components with confidence that could only come from years of hands-on experience with M1A2 Abrams tanks. The hydraulic fluid contamination is definitely particulate-based, Elena announced after examining fluid samples from all 3 tanks. The contamination pattern shows metallic particles that are consistent with pump housing degradation in the central reservoir system. Tank Commander Hayes moved closer to observe Elena's diagnostic process, and what she saw made her increasingly uncomfortable about her assumptions regarding Elena's background. Elena wasn't fumbling through unfamiliar procedures or guessing about system functions. She was working with the kind of systematic expertise that typically required months of formal military training. "How are you accessing those hydraulic test points?" Hayes asked, her voice carrying a mixture of professional curiosity and growing suspicion. "Those aren't standard maintenance access locations that would be documented in civilian contractor procedures." Elena paused for just a moment in her diagnostic routine, and those watching closely might have noticed that Hayes's question had made her slightly uncomfortable. "Advanced diagnostic procedures require accessing specialized test points that aren't used during routine maintenance operations," Elena replied carefully. But Hayes knew that the diagnostic access points Elena was using weren't included in standard technical manuals, and her systematic approach to hydraulic testing suggested familiarity with classified maintenance procedures that weren't available to civilian contractors. Staff Sergeant Chen had been watching Elena's repair process with growing agitation, and his suspicions about Elena's true background were reaching a breaking point. There was something about the way Elena was working with the military equipment that suggested professional-level experience that didn't match anything in her application materials. "Martinez, I want you to stop what you're doing immediately," Chen ordered, his voice carrying command authority that demanded immediate compliance. Elena looked up from the hydraulic testing equipment with an expression that remained professionally neutral, but there was something in her eyes that suggested Chen's order had pushed her patience beyond acceptable limits. "Staff Sergeant Chen, I'm in the middle of contamination testing that will identify the source of your hydraulic failures," Elena replied with controlled precision. "Interrupting the diagnostic sequence now could delay the assessment resolution and affect your crew's certification timeline." "I don't care about the diagnostic sequence," Chen replied firmly. "I care about maintaining proper security protocols with our armored vehicles. You've already exceeded appropriate access levels for civilian contractors, and I'm terminating this repair attempt immediately." The confrontation was creating significant tension among the assessment crews, who found themselves caught between respect for military authority and desperate desire to proceed with their certification testing. Several tank commanders were exchanging glances that suggested they were more concerned about their assessment opportunities than security protocol disputes between Chen and Elena.
Elena saved her diagnostic progress and stepped back from the hydraulic testing equipment, but her compliance with Chen's order was clearly reluctant and accompanied by controlled tension that suggested she was exercising considerable self-restraint. "The contamination analysis is approximately 70% complete," Elena announced. "If someone wants to finish the diagnostic process, the remaining procedures are documented in the advanced technical manuals." Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood examined the diagnostic display that Elena had been working with, and what she found confirmed her growing suspicions about Elena's technical capabilities. The contamination analysis showed systematic identification of hydraulic problems that would take most military specialists hours to diagnose properly. "Martinez, this diagnostic work is incredibly sophisticated," Blackwood said, her voice carrying genuine professional admiration mixed with curiosity about Elena's background. "You've identified contamination sources that would challenge our most experienced maintenance personnel." Elena's response was carefully neutral, but there was something in her tone that suggested Blackwood's professional recognition meant more to her than casual praise about contractor capabilities. Hydraulic diagnostic procedures follow logical patterns once you understand system architecture and contamination characteristics. But Blackwood knew that military hydraulic systems weren't typical industrial equipment, and the diagnostic procedures Elena had used were specific to armored vehicle applications that required specialized training to understand properly. Her systematic approach to the contamination analysis suggested experience with similar systems that extended well beyond civilian mechanical work. As the assessment crisis continued to unfold, none of the military personnel present realized they were about to witness a demonstration of capabilities that would fundamentally change their understanding of who Elena Martinez really was and why she had been working at their facility for the past 8 months. Elena Martinez slowly removed her safety glasses, revealing eyes that carried the unmistakable intensity of someone who had commanded armored units in the world's most dangerous combat zones. When she spoke again, her voice held the quiet authority that made every soldier present instinctively straighten to attention. "My name is Major Elena Martinez, United States Army Armor Branch," she said, her civilian contractor persona evaporating completely. "Former commander of the 3rd Battalion, 8th Cavalry Regiment's Alpha Company. I've been conducting a classified investigation into equipment sabotage at this facility for the past 8 months." The stunned silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Staff Sergeant Chen's clipboard hitting the concrete floor. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood stared at the woman who had been cleaning their tanks, her mind racing to process the implications of what she had just heard. "The hydraulic failures weren't mechanical malfunctions," Elena continued, her tone taking on the clinical precision of a briefing officer. "They were caused by deliberate contamination of the central fluid reservoir system. Someone with intimate knowledge of these vehicles has been systematically sabotaging critical components to disrupt training schedules and compromise operational readiness." She looked directly at Master Sergeant Foster, whose face had gone completely pale as the realization of discovery set in. Foster's hand moved instinctively toward her sidearm, but Elena was already in motion. The supposedly harmless civilian contractor moved with lethal precision that demonstrated years of advanced combat training. Elena disarmed Foster and secured her in a restraint hold before anyone could blink, the entire sequence taking less than 3 seconds. "Master Sergeant Nicole Foster," Elena announced, as military police sirens wailed in the distance, "you're under arrest for espionage, treason, and sabotage of United States military equipment. Your encrypted communications with foreign operatives and your offshore financial accounts have been under surveillance for 6 months." As Foster was led away in handcuffs, her carefully constructed facade of loyal military service crumbling completely, Elena turned to address the assembled tank crews who were still processing the dramatic revelation that had just unfolded before them. "The contamination pattern in your hydraulic systems matches previous sabotage incidents at Fort Knox and Fort Benning," Elena explained. "Foster had been using her position as maintenance chief to introduce particulate contaminants that would cause delayed failures during critical training exercises, creating operational disruptions that would be reported to her foreign contacts." Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood shook her head in amazement as the scope of the deception became clear. "All this time, we thought you were just performing basic maintenance work. You were actually conducting a counterintelligence operation right under our noses." Elena smiled for the first time since anyone had known her, but it was a smile that carried the weight of someone who had spent months maintaining a cover identity while watching potential threats to national security. "Sometimes the best place to gather intelligence is hiding in plain sight, Colonel. People tell you things when they think you're not important enough to matter." She gestured toward the diagnostic equipment she had been using to analyze the hydraulic contamination. The sabotage was sophisticated, designed to look like normal mechanical failures that would be attributed to harsh environmental conditions and heavy usage. Foster had been timing the contamination introduction to coincide with major training events, maximizing the operational impact. Tank Commander Hayes stepped forward with obvious curiosity about Elena's true background and capabilities. "Ma'am, how long have you been working in counterintelligence operations?"
Your cover as a civilian contractor was completely convincing. 15 years in armored warfare, Elena replied, her voice carrying the professional pride of someone who had dedicated her career to protecting military capabilities, including 3 combat deployments and 2 years with Army Criminal Investigation Command specializing in equipment sabotage investigations. Staff Sergeant Chen, who had been the most vocal skeptic about Elena's capabilities, approached with an expression that mixed professional respect with embarrassment about his previous treatment of someone who outranked him significantly. "Major Martinez," Chen said formally, "I owe you an apology for questioning your expertise and treating you with disrespect. Your technical knowledge and diagnostic capabilities were clearly far beyond anything we should have expected from a contractor." Elena accepted Chen's apology with the gracious professionalism that characterized her approach to military relationships. "Staff Sergeant Chen, your skepticism was actually helpful to my investigation. People who are trying to hide criminal activity become careless when they think they're dealing with someone who doesn't pose a threat to their operations." She turned to address the entire group of tank crews who had witnessed the dramatic conclusion of her months-long investigation. "Your training exercises and equipment readiness have been compromised for over a year, but Foster's arrest will end the sabotage campaign that has been affecting multiple installations throughout the Army's armored training pipeline." The immediate aftermath of Elena's revelation transformed the entire dynamic at Fort Richardson's training facility. The tank crews who had been preparing for their winter warfare assessment found themselves witnesses to the conclusion of a counterintelligence operation that had implications extending far beyond their immediate training concerns. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood coordinated with Army Criminal Investigation Command to process the evidence that Elena had been systematically gathering during her 8 months undercover. Foster's arrest led to the discovery of an extensive espionage network that had been compromising military training operations across multiple installations. The intelligence that Foster provided to foreign operatives included detailed information about our tank capabilities, crew training procedures, and deployment schedules, Elena explained during her formal debriefing with brigade leadership. Her position as maintenance chief gave her access to technical specifications and operational timelines that would be extremely valuable to potential adversaries. The hydraulic contamination that had threatened the winter warfare assessment was quickly resolved once Elena identified the sabotage methodology. Her diagnostic work revealed that Foster had been introducing metallic particles into the central fluid reservoir system using a sophisticated delivery mechanism that would cause delayed failures during critical training periods. "The contamination was designed to appear random," Elena continued, "but the timing patterns showed clear correlation with major training events and assessment schedules. Foster was deliberately targeting exercises that would have the maximum impact on operational readiness and deployment certification." With the sabotage threat eliminated and the hydraulic systems restored to full functionality, the winter warfare assessment proceeded as scheduled. The tank crews who had been threatened with certification delays were able to complete their evaluations and achieve the deployment readiness status they had been working toward for months. Tank Commander Hayes approached Elena after the successful completion of the assessment exercises, her expression reflecting genuine admiration for Elena's professionalism and dedication throughout the investigation. "Major Martinez," Hayes said, "watching you maintain your cover identity while conducting this investigation was incredible. You never broke character, even when people were treating you with disrespect and questioning your capabilities." Elena's response revealed the personal cost of maintaining an undercover identity for 8 months while enduring constant mockery and professional dismissal. "The hardest part wasn't the technical work or the investigation itself," she admitted. "It was listening to people discuss equipment problems that I could have fixed immediately, but knowing that revealing my knowledge would compromise the larger mission." Staff Sergeant Chen, who had been Elena's most persistent critic throughout her time at the facility, requested a private conversation to address his treatment of someone who had been working to protect his unit's operational security. "Ma'am, I need to apologize not just for questioning your technical expertise, but for the way I treated you personally. You were conducting vital work to protect our capabilities, and I made your job more difficult with my skepticism and disrespect." Elena accepted Chen's apology with understanding that reflected her experience managing complex interpersonal dynamics during undercover operations. "Staff Sergeant Chen, your suspicious nature actually made my cover more believable. People who are engaged in espionage activities become less cautious when they think they're dealing with someone who's being dismissed and undermined by military personnel." The investigation's conclusion revealed that Foster's espionage activities had been affecting training operations at multiple Army installations, compromising the readiness of armored units throughout the service. Elena's work had identified and stopped a systematic campaign of sabotage that could have had serious implications for national security. The Foreign Intelligence Service that Foster was working with had been gathering detailed information about our tank capabilities, crew training standards, and deployment schedules, Elena explained during a final briefing with the tank crews. Private Williams, who had participated in the campaign of mockery against Elena during her months undercover, approached with obvious embarrassment about his previous behavior towards someone whose service record far exceeded his own. "Major Martinez," Williams said formally, "I want to apologize for the way I treated you during your investigation. I had no idea about your background or the important work you were doing to protect our unit." Elena's response to Williams demonstrated the leadership qualities that had earned her command responsibilities in armored warfare units. Private Williams, maintaining effective cover required people to see exactly what they expected to see. Your behavior actually helped establish my credibility as someone who wasn't a threat to criminal activities. The successful conclusion of Elena's investigation had broader implications for Army security procedures and counterintelligence operations. Her work had demonstrated the effectiveness of long-term undercover operations for identifying insider threats and protecting critical military capabilities from espionage activities. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood formally recognized Elena's contributions during a brigade ceremony that acknowledged her professionalism, dedication, and technical expertise throughout the investigation. Major Martinez conducted herself with exceptional skill and determination during 8 months of undercover work that protected our unit's operational capabilities and contributed to national security. Elena's response to the recognition reflected her commitment to the mission and her understanding of the sacrifices required for effective counterintelligence work. The success of this investigation depended on the support and professionalism of everyone at this facility. Protecting our military capabilities requires the dedication of soldiers at every level. As Elena prepared to transition from her undercover role back to her regular duties with Army Criminal Investigation Command, she reflected on the lessons learned during her months at Fort Richardson. The experience had demonstrated both the vulnerability of military installations to insider threats and the effectiveness of patient, systematic investigation work. "The people who try to harm our military capabilities often hide behind positions of trust and authority," Elena observed. "Protecting against those threats requires constant vigilance and the willingness to look beyond surface appearances to identify potential security risks." The tank crews who had witnessed Elena's investigation understood that they had been present for something far more significant than a training exercise. They had seen firsthand how dedication, professionalism, and technical expertise could protect military capabilities from threats that might otherwise go undetected. The most dangerous people often hide behind the most ordinary masks. They perform routine maintenance, organize supplies, and work quietly in the background while protecting the capabilities that keep our military forces ready for any challenge. Sometimes, the heroes among us are the ones who remain invisible until the moment when their true skills are needed most. Elena Martinez had spent 8 months being underestimated, mocked, and dismissed while conducting vital work to protect American military capabilities. Her story serves as a reminder that extraordinary dedication often comes disguised as ordinary service, and that the people who keep us safe are sometimes the ones we notice least. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.